All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. This is Alive and Thriving, and I got a cool new toy over the weekend. Here it is. I got myself a nice condenser mic. Audio file is probably going to pick that up, but okay. So we're getting a little more professional here each and every day, and I just want to thank each and every one of you who watches this video. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please subscribe. And we're going to be reading from Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East. This is chapter 22. So without further ado, let's get into it. Oh, and disclaimer, I'm breaking chapter 22 into two parts. It's 10 pages long, so I try not to do more than 5 pages at a time. Keeps the videos to roughly 30 minutes, gives me a chance to do commentary, and keeps the energy high. So again, thanks for being here, and let's get rocking with chapter 22. The next morning, we left the village with only Emil and Jast accompanying us, our objective being the village we had decided upon for our winter quarters. The winters in this part of the country are quite severe, and we felt that we wished to make certain of comfortable quarters before the cold spell set in. In this, as in a great many other matters, our fears were not well grounded, for when we arrived, we found comfortable quarters all ready for us. Our trail from the village led across the plateau, then up a long winding canyon to the divide where the second fortified village that guarded the plateau we had crossed was located. The canyon walls were from 200 to 500 feet perpendicular and joined the mountains, which rose to an elevation of 2,000 feet above the crest where the trail crossed the divide. At the top of the divide, the two great rock ridges jutted up on either side of a level space about 5 acres in extent. These two ridges were about 600 feet apart. A wall 40 feet high had been built across the open space, thus connecting the two ridges of rock and forming an effectual barrier. This wall was 60 feet wide at the bottom and 30 feet wide at the top, and was so constructed that the top formed a runway over which huge rocks could be rolled, then dropped to the ground on the outer side of the wall, where the ground sloped sharply and connected with a steep declivity down where the trail passed on the way to the other side of the divide. There were chutes arranged along the wall at intervals of 100 feet so that the rocks would gain headway enough to clear the base of the wall before they struck the ground. When they did strike, they would roll down the slope, then over the declivity and on down the canyon for about 4 miles before they would stop, if they did not fly into pieces from their own momentum. In all, this formed an effectual defense, as the canyon was not over 50 feet wide at any place in the 4 miles, and it was steep enough to give great momentum to the rolling rocks. There were also 2 places on each side of the canyon where rocks could be loosened and would roll down. These places were connected by trails cut along the mountainside from each end of the wall. There were a number of rocks, about 12 feet through, placed along the top of the wall ready for an emergency. We were told that it had not been found necessary to use any of them, as there was but one tribe that had ever attempted to gain access to the village uninvited, and this tribe had been all but annihilated by rocks released from the 4 stations in the canyon walls. The first rocks released in their downward course had released until an avalanche swept down the village, carrying all before it. We were told the rocks on top of the wall had rested where they were for over 2,000 years, as there had not been a war in that country during that time. We found that 6 houses comprising the village were built into the wall, 3 stories high, with the roofs level with the top of the walls. Access to it was thus gained by stairways leading up through each story to the roof of each house. Openings for windows were left in the wall at the 3rd story. These windows overlooked the canyon below. The trail could be seen from these windows and the top of the wall as it wound around the mountainside miles away. We were made comfortable for the night in the third story of one of these houses, and after an early dinner, we went to the roof to see the sunset. We had been there but a few moments when a man apparently 50 years of age came up the stairs to the roof. After being introduced by Jas, he joined in the conversation. We soon found he lived in the village we had selected for our winter quarters and was on his way there. We supposed he was traveling as we were and invited him to join our party. He thanked us and said he would be able to make the distance much more quickly than we could, that he had stopped in the village to see a relative and would be home that evening. The conversation then turned to the temple, the three of us had visited with Emil and Jast. This man spoke quietly and said, "I saw you sitting on the parapet of the temple that night." Then we went on and gave the dream or vision just as it came to me and as it had been set forth in this book. This came as a surprise to me and my associates, as I had not mentioned the occurrence to them. This man was a perfect stranger to us, yet he recounted the dream as vividly as it had appeared to me. Then he went on to say, "You were shown just what we are shown, that man comes forth into unity just as long as he has consciously realized this and used the power of dominion rightly. But the moment he, in his mortal self, conceived dual powers, he began to see dual. He misused this power and brought forth duality. For man is a free will agent and brings forth that which he gazes upon. Then diversity and wide separation resulted, and this has followed him all over the earth. But a change is coming. The diversity has about reached its limit, and mankind is recognizing that all came forth from the one source. Recognizing this, men are now coming closer and closer together. Man is beginning to realize that every other man is his brother instead of his enemy. When man does fully realize this, he will see that just as all came from the one source, all must return to that source or become as brothers in reality. Then he will be in heaven and will recognize that heaven means the inner peace and harmony created by man right here on earth. He will then see that he makes his heaven or hell just as he chooses. This heaven has been conceived rightly, but misplaced geographically. He will know that God dwells within him, and not only within him, but in everything about him. Every rock, every tree, every plant, every flower, and every created thing. That God is in the very air he breathes, the water he drinks, the money he spends. That God is in the substance of all things. When he breathes God, as much as he does air. When he partakes of food, he partakes of God, as much as he does of food. It is not our wish to form new cults or sects. We feel that the churches that are established today are sufficient and they are the logical centers to reach out and help the people to the realization of God through the Christ in all. Those associated with the churches must realize that the church but typifies the one thing, the Christ consciousness in all mankind. If they realize this, where can the diversity lie but in the concept of man's mortal mind and not in the church? Wherein, then, is one church or society different from another? The diversity thought to exist today must be wholly in man's mortal mind. See what this diversity has led to? The great wars, the intense hate engendered between nations and families and even individuals, and all because one church organization or another has thought that its creed or doctrine was better than that of another. Yet in all reality, all are the same, for they all lead to the same place. It would not be possible for each to have a heaven of its own, for if it did, when a fellow man finished his particular brand of church organization and was ready to receive his reward, he would be obliged to spend the remainder of his existence looking through the maze of heavens for the particular one he is destined for. The church organizations and those associated with them are coming closer each day, and the time will come when they will be united as one. When all are as one, then there will be no need of organization. Let me see if I want to read a little bit more here. Thus ends the reading of chapter 22, part 1 of Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. So, what they are referring to, just in case you don't remember, is Baird's vision when he was on top of the parapet at that temple, where he saw a single ray of light basically coming from behind him, or he envisioned that it was about him in that very moment. And then that ray of light fanned out into this rainbow array of light. And the bands, as they separated from the singularity and went out in distance from singularity, they got thicker and thicker. So you had a blue band start out narrow and get really thick at the middle point, if you will. And then they all converged back onto a singularity. And not only was it on a singular plane that Baird had this vision, he saw, basically, if you will, imagine a sphere, all right? And imagine that you cut the sphere in half. That's the first rainbow fan of light. And at this side, if you will, of the circle, things start out as single white point. And they fan out in a rainbow. It starts as a single white point, and then it fans out as a rainbow. And then it comes back together on the other side of the sphere. Okay, now imagine that. That's the center plane of this sphere. That's the timeline that Baird was on. But then imagine that at that same center point at the back of the sphere, 1 degree up. So now it's going to arc just slightly. Instead of going straight across, it's going to arc just slightly. And it's going to be a whole nother display of the exact same thing that he saw on that flat timeline where he was at. And then 1 degree up of that, it's another arc. And then another arc. And then at the very top, it's a steep one. Now imagine there's like 360 different variations of this fanning out of rainbow light. And it's all encapsulated in this sphere. That represents all of the different timelines that can exist in the here and now. Now it's infinite in number, the amount of timelines that can exist in the here and now. But what Baird was being shown is that right in his third density reality where he was at right then and there, there's the timeline that he's on, and then there is the timeline that someone else is on, and there's all of these multiple timelines that people can inhabit while they're existing in the same density, the same third density sphere. Now, what does that look like in practical life? How do you make sense of something like that? 360 different perspectives? Maybe that's one way. 360 different perspectives. Or maybe it's 360 different frequencies of thought, vibratory frequencies. The topmost curve representing maybe the highest frequency, and the lowest most curve representing the lowest frequency. And what might that look like in a real life scenario, a day-to-day experience? Well, imagine a hell on earth. Imagine a POW, a prisoner of war, an American, North American, United States prisoner of war in Hanoi prison during the Vietnam War, being tortured, right? For years, 4 years every single day in a row. Maybe that is like close to the very lowest frequency that you could be experiencing. Or maybe somebody who has a really nice life in the United States of America, but is depressed and can't see the beautiful experience that they're having. They just know suffering, and it's being generated by their depression. Maybe that is also down there on that lower arc of reality. And then you have people who are just thriving in life, right? And their mental capacity is tapped into a higher frequency, right? They're putting out a higher level of vibration. They're experiencing more joy, so they're generating more joy, and they're receiving more joy, and then they're putting it out and receiving it. And they're not immune to lower vibrations, but they have made themselves kind of inoculated against them. They've put up a good defense against them, and the best defense against lower forms of vibration, which is ultimately fear, is love, joy, being inspired, following your bliss. So basically, if we think about it that way, Baird was basically seeing in the form of vibration, in the form of light represented inside this sphere, all of the different ways in which humanity can experience life on the same sphere, the planet Earth in this case. You have people who are living exceptional lives right now, and they don't know anything but love and joy. They've experienced suffering because the planet Earth has that to offer, but they largely know a joyful experience to life. And you have some people who don't know that that's what life has to offer here on planet Earth, who have only known pain and suffering, or regiment, or dogma, tradition, lack of love, lack of joy, lack of prosperity. But the beautiful thing about Earth, and the beautiful thing about this sphere in this analogy, is that you're not limited to being on one particular fan of light, one particular timeline. An individual who was being tortured in the hells of the Hanoi prison, I don't know if cases like this transpired, but an individual who was in a situation like that, it need not necessarily be the Hanoi prisons. And anybody who's in a form of incarceration can elevate their thinking process to a high vibratory state and experience the bliss and the peace and the joy and the love that the universal one source is. So your geographic location, your physical location on the planet, does not necessarily matter as much as your ability to raise your own consciousness. Now, if you don't understand anything about raising your own consciousness, then you will largely be affected by your environment. You may operate more towards the 51% of the time and more with an external locus of control. A locus of control is the way that you perceive your emotional state coming to be. So if you perceive other people and things and places and situations and events and phenomena as being responsible for your internal state of being, then you identify with an external locus of control. You're like ectothermic, like a reptile needs to get their body heat from the sun. They're dependent upon an external source for their feel-good, regenerative, life-giving abundance. So a person with an external locus of control will prosper in an area that promotes freedom and prosperity and abundance. But an individual with an external locus of control who finds themselves incarcerated in the worst possible way will perceive hell on earth. And a person with an internal locus of control need not be largely affected by their environment. They can be in an incarceration experience, whether it's one of the mind or whether it's one of the physical body, and they can elevate their thinking process to experience joy and experience peace and experience timelessness. So just a funny little sidebar, this is what I always thought I would do if, God forbid, I was ever incarcerated. I've never done anything to land me in jail, but if I was ever to find myself in a time like that, knowing what I know now and being the practice meditator that I am now, I would do everything in my power to meditate and experience timelessness, right? You're still going to experience the doldrums of life and all the blah that's going to go on with that, but I would do everything in my power to basically try to transcend those physical limitations, all right? That's a little bit off the mark because if you're in prison, it's just not good in and of itself. So I'm going to get away from that for a second. The through point here is that an internal locus of control is not going to allow the external to dictate how it experiences life. An internal locus of control is going to basically radiate out or project out in a benevolent type of a way a service to others that is also service to self kind of way that says, I am putting out a positive vibration. I am putting out a feel good energy. Therefore, I'm going to get back a feel good energy. An external locus of control is saying, I need the feel good energy to come to me, then I will feel good. I will absorb it and I will feel it and I will bask in it. But if it stops coming, I'm going to be affected by that. And if it stops coming from the opposite direction, which is fear, I'm going to feel fearful and I'm going to be affected by that. Okay, so we are living in a time right now where you see that all around. It's become much easier right now, especially with friends and family and people that you're really close with, to identify who has an external locus of control and who has an internal locus of control. An internal locus of control individual isn't allowing their mind or allowing their life to be heavily influenced by the Wuhan COVID-19 virus. All right? They're still being pragmatic, they're still taking precautions, but they're not the individual that's raiding the grocery store and buying 4 months worth of toilet paper, okay? They are the one who knows that everything's going to be good on the other side of this because, as it says in our Bible, everything is very good, all right? So, with that, the external locus of control individual, unfortunate as it is somebody who's tapped into the mainstream media vein and they're being fed fear, and then they feel fearful about the state of condition that is going on in the world right now, all right? An internal locus of control individual is somebody who maybe is the head of a household, or maybe who is like this, it's an equal head of household between the two spouses, and one of them lost their job because of this situation, but they're not fearful. They know that they are going to be all right, that there's a higher power that's got their back, and if they don't believe in a higher power, then they know that they are going to make it happen, all right? They're going to go out there and they're going to make that success and that abundance come back into their life by the sweat of their brow. That's an internal locus of control. Someone who's not letting this situation get them down, who's taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, or someone who's not letting this situation get them down because they know that the universal one source has always had their back, and it's only a matter of time before that abundance and prosperity flows back into their life. And because they have an internal locus of control, they set aside for this rainy day, back when, because they knew it's an eventuality in the state of Florida, especially, that something's going to happen that could limit your ability to go out and work and earn a paycheck. All right, mainly hurricanes here. Now, getting off of that little soapbox for a second and getting back onto the sphere analogy, which Baird saw, we are in that time period, as the traveler is telling him here, where the time is drawing nigh, that no matter which timeline you're on, right, we're all about to go into this convergent level effect where everybody's going to be made aware of the underlying reality that has predominantly been affecting life as we know it on planet Earth, okay? So, just like you get massive groups of people together and they meditate on a specific thing, like reducing crime in Seattle or like elevating the consciousness of the planet, and they raise the frequency of the planet in like short periods of time. A really good example of this is you can go and look at 2 Sundays ago. There was a group of us, about 26,000 of us meditated together across the world, really, but predominantly I think in the United States. And we took the signature frequency of the Earth, the Schumann resonance, from 7.8 hertz and brought it all the way up to, at the peak, 40 hertz. That is unheard of. So that is the power of conscious groups of people getting together and consciously channeling a feel-good energy, which is ultimately source, love, God, okay? Now, Imagine that you had a whole, like you had on planet Earth, maybe you have like 1 billion people, and they want to channel negative energy into the world. They want to channel enslavement type energy into the world, and they want to use the channeling of that energy in order to advance their own agenda, but detrimentally affect everybody else. If they are doing that, then they're going to have an effect. They're going to bring that energy in, right? If the rest of us were aware that something like that was happening and we counteracted that type of directed use of conscious energy towards positivity, towards feeling good, towards counteracting that, saying, no, thank you, we want true freedom. If we were doing something like that, then the negative, so to speak, would just be completely canceled out. Okay? It's like you can't have a noise level operating at this decibel beat and or drowned out a noise that's operating at this decibel. Whichever one is louder, so to speak, is ultimately going to be the one that you hear, that other people hear. And it's that way with group mass meditation. When you get a massive amount of people channeling a crime drop in Seattle, for example, you will see that their ability to channel in that love, what's the word I'm looking for? It washes out, okay? It counteracts all of the different nodes on the map, so to speak, of individuals thinking, I want to rob, I want to loot, I want to rape, I want to do crime, I want to transgress, all right? That is what I'm talking about here with when we're talking about the sphere analogy, we're talking about the different fans of light, okay? So you got everybody, and each person can be at a different level at any respective time. But at a certain point, right, there is a through line, there is a baseline of reality that is truly happening. It's kind of the firmament upon which all of the other realities exist. At a certain point, everything has to converge back onto that firmament, if you will, that baseline reality. And the thing, whatever it is, whatever has predominantly been happening on that baseline reality, everyone has to become aware of it at the same time. Whether it's through revelation or whether it's through a conscious decision-making process by all humanity to act as brothers and sisters, to be loving towards one another. So that's what he says in this chapter. He says, we are fast approaching that time when all will either recognize the divinity of man, the oneness of all creation, the flowers, the birds, the bees, the beasts, the humans, the minerals, and the plants, all being of one source, the air, the ether, the planet, the universe, the solar system, everything, okay? You either by revelation have this truth presented to you if you're unaware of it, or you help bring it into mass consciousness if you are aware of it and you're living it out and you're channeling it into life. If you're already aware of this, then you are that person who's helping to channel this energy into this reality, into existence. Because there's no higher religion than truth, and they talk about in this book series. There's no higher teaching than truth. There's no higher religion than truth. And it's like that baseline reality. Everything has to converge back on it. And everybody has to go in the same direction, so to speak. But if you're absolutely intent on denying the truth, which is that we are all of one source, and that it goes by many names, yet it is the same substance no matter which perspective or which direction you choose to view it from. If you choose to just 100% deny that, which is your free will, man's a free will agent as they talk about in here, then you won't be able to continue operating in the same physical time-space reality where the majority does recognize that to be the universal truth. So if 51% of humanity consciously acknowledges that there is one source and that we are all of that one source, and then we begin behaving that way, if you are so intent through either density or anger towards the Creator that you just will not accept this reality, you will not accept this consciousness that all the rest of us share, then you won't be able to continue living in this time-space reality where we exist, okay? And that is exactly what we have happening right now on planet Earth. We have the convergence taking place where all things will merge back onto the one infinite source, the one infinite creator. And for all of those of us who are above that baseline reality, we're up here in the upper half of that arc where we are serving others, where we are inspired by spirit, where we are loving towards one another, and where we actively want this reality to take hold in mass consciousness so that it can be of the utmost benefit, which it always is throughout all time, throughout all places. It is the most beneficial thing that can ever grace the consciousness of conscious beings and then propel their civilization to heights that they previously don't consciously know. If you're on the timeline, if you're on the side of the light, so to speak, if you're serving that, where you're actively working to eliminate duality from your thinking process and bring singularity and oneness down to not only your own personal life and the way that you interact with others, having that be your modality of being, if you are serving that, you are ultimately helping it come to fruition here on planet Earth. And it's predestined, it's preordained to take place eventually, right, on planet Earth. But it's happening now, okay? This is that eventual, inevitable time, the time of times, if you will, the revelation times, where it actively is going to happen. We are going to live through it. We are going to see it in our lifetimes. It may happen as quickly as this year, 2020, all right? Matthew 26:20. Behold, my children, go to your homes and lock the doors and wait for the Lord's anger to pass. Be there for a time. March 26th, 2020 is when the basic national declaration in the United States went out to stay home and stay safe due to the coronavirus. These coincidences don't just happen. There's no such thing as a coincidence. It's all happening for a reason, okay? Now, I talked about if you're, I encouraged and I promoted and I was a cheerleader for the people and the individuals who are actively working to get that singularity into this reality that we all share, onto this planet, I guess you could say, this firmament upon which we all live. If you're not, then it's never too late. You can ultimately discard service to self ways for service to other ways. And it can happen like they talked about in chapter 21 through a joyful letting go of material bondage or through a bittersweet retracing of one's steps back the road of experience. So you choose ultimately what timeline you want to be on, okay? You can joyfully let go of your service to self ways that are detrimental to yourself, to others, ultimately detrimental to yourself and the environment around you, through a joyful letting go of that, through a conscious recognition that, you know what, this really, I've worn this thing out. This old pair of shoes, it's time to go, right? Let's put on the new shoes, the Christ shoes, the Buddha shoes, the Muhammad shoes, the Krishna shoes. Let's put on the sneakers that are going to carry us towards oneness. The oneness sneakers. I'm going to make those. The oneness sneakers. Put those things on and let's get walking, right? Let's all move in the collective direction of oneness. And if you are so entrenched in your ways as to completely not want that to be the reality upon which all of us share, upon this firmament upon which all of us live, you will experience the ramifications of the karma of the Lucifer experiment, all right? If everybody else is tuned in, tapped in, and turned on to the oneness that really is in all reality, and you, by whatever means, which I doubt it's going to be anybody that watches this video, but if someone, by any means, cannot get on board with that and chooses not to get on board with that through their conscious decision-making powers, because humans are free will agents, then they will not be able to continue with us on this timeline, okay? They've had their day in the sun, so to speak, all right? And I'll wrap this video up with this kind of sphere light band analogy, okay? At the center of the sphere, when the light rays are the thickest, when humanity is the most dense in their consciousness, that is when the planet Earth, geographically speaking, is the furthest from the central sun, when our solar system is the furthest from the central sun of the galaxy. That is when the Earth's aura is the dimmest, so to speak. And that's what makes Jesus Christ so magnificent, because he came here when the Earth was the least supportive of the Christ energy manifesting in a central point of consciousness that he was. And he did it, all right? That is the literal definition of overcoming death, like thricefold, right? Overcoming death of the physical body, which is the enslavement to the material and the fear thought modality that rules people. The bloodlust, killing people, service to self time that really was that period of time during the Roman Empire when Jesus was walking the earth. But the planet Earth was also most asleep at that time. Its aura was the dimmest. It was the furthest away from the central sun, which also represents the one infinite source. But it was the furthest away, thus, like in an ectothermic sense, absorbing the least amount of light that it possibly could at that time. So its aura was very dim. But Christ came during that time when the darkness had its most firm grip that it has ever had on our sphere, on human consciousness, and still broke through the veil, lifted his consciousness to the point of Christhood, and then demonstrated the spiritual transformation that can take place in every single one of us. That's what makes Christ Jesus one of the most beloved ascended masters who has ever existed, because he came when it was going to be the hardest to do it and did it. All right? Now, us as a collective humanity and our solar system is getting ever closer to the central sun. And we're going through these energetic changes because the universe is moving through a nebulous cloud. I may be losing some people here, but the universe is going through a nebulous cloud of electromagnetically charged particles that are having a profound effect on our consciousness. And this whole COVID-19 business was the quote-unquote darkness. It was its last attempt at bringing eternal darkness, right? That would ultimately serve their agenda, but enslave the rest of us. And as we have seen, it's not the global pandemic that maybe you could call the devil would like to see unleashed upon humanity. It's going to be relatively mild to some other pandemics which have wrought massive death upon humanity. And ultimately, it's not, I don't think, and the numbers may be up there at this point, but I don't think it's going to take more lives than like the world wars that we've had. All right, it may not even come close to that. And in New York, they were thinking that, mid-April, end of April was going to be the apex of death in the city from the COVID-19 Wuhan Chinese communist virus, but it's just probably not going to happen, okay? They probably are going to round out their peak numbers in the next few days if they have not already. And that's from Governor Andrew Cuomo. So I'm not going to go down that route of politics right now. What I'm saying is we're coming up on that convergence. So in that sphere, we are approaching that time period when all of the bands of light converge back on the one. And for all of us who are ready to accept oneness, ready to live as brothers and sisters and be more loving, and we've been doing the meditative conscious work to raise our consciousness, we're going to experience paradise. We're going to experience joy. We're going to experience abundance and prosperity, an economy that just completely trumps, no pun intended, the one that we've had for the past 3 years in the United States of America. We're going to enter into a Renaissance period of truth revelation and archaeological discovery and exploration, okay? It's going to be wonderful. And I encourage each and every one of you to hold fast to an image of humanity existing on earth like that. Because that's the reality I want to live in. I know that's the reality that you want to live in if you've watched the video this far. And especially if you are an individual who believes or wants to believe that the Christ energy lives within you. And that all you need to do is fan it into a flame. And you may be wondering, staying up at night, who knows? How in the world do I possibly fan this ember into a flame? Well, you are being greatly assisted by the planet Earth right now. Because the planet Earth is doing this too. It's a conscious entity. And it's raising its vibration, right? It's getting higher and higher, which is raising yours. And all you got to do is just hop on board that train, so to speak, and join us for the Ascension event. Namaste. I wish each and every one of you a blessed evening. Take care.